This is the moment when Judge Frank Caprio's voice trembled for the first time in anyone's memory. The story of the 19-year-old young man standing before him was identical to his own story from 40 years ago. Same age, same offense, same reason. But this time, the judge was the one making the decision. The familiar atmosphere of Providence Municipal Court felt different this morning. Judge Frank Caprio had been sitting behind the same desk for 30 years, but today he felt as excited as if it were his first day. As he glanced through the files in his hand, a name among the routine traffic violation cases caught his attention. Michael Romano, aged 19, speeding violation. The name felt familiar, but he couldn't remember why. Perhaps he had encountered so many Romanos that this seemed like just another one. But his instincts whispered that this was different. Court Clerk Sarah began calling the defendants as usual. Michael Romano, please step forward. When the young man stood up, Judge Caprio's heart suddenly raced, his posture, his stance, even his walk. It was as if he was looking at a picture of his own youth. That morning, coming to court, Caprio had woken up early as usual and read the newspapers while having breakfast. Local news, sports results, whether he thought he was about to start a routine day. But life sometimes gives its greatest lessons at the most unexpected moments. As Michael Romano approached the court podium, he kept his hands hidden in his trouser pockets. Judge Caprio knew this posture very well, a mixture of nervousness, shame, and helplessness. The expression on the young man's face was identical to Frank Caprio's from 40 years ago. Michael Romano, Judge Caprio, began, but his voice trembled unexpectedly. This had never happened in his 30-year career. He cleared his throat and started again. The charge against you is exceeding the speed limit in a school zone. You were going 45 miles per hour in a 25-mile zone. Do you have anything to say about this? When Michael raised his head, the panic in his eyes surprised Judge Caprio. This was just a traffic ticket, but the young man looked as if he was experiencing the biggest crisis of his life. Judge Caprio's eyes noticed the young man's trembling hands. Those hands were the same trembling hands he had when he stood in the courtroom in his youth. The same anxiety, the same fear, the same uncertainty, ... Your Honor, Michael said, his voice trembling, I know I did wrong, I apologize, but this fine will be a big problem for me. Judge Caprio's curiosity increased. What kind of problem will it be? Can you explain? Michael took a deep breath. Your Honor, I'm a scholarship student at the University of Rhode Island. I'm studying law. If this violation goes on my record, I'll lose my scholarship. My family can't afford to send me to school. I'm their only child, and I'm their hope. These words caused bells to ring in Judge Caprio's head. His own story was word for word identical. In 1984, he too was a law student. He too was a scholarship student. He too was an only child, and his family's entire hope. Judge Caprio's mind began to relive that moment. His own court day, that cold winter morning, the same fears, the same anxieties. It was as if the wheel of time had turned backward, and he was seeing himself as that 19-year-old young man again. How would you lose your scholarship? The judge asked, feeling his own voice coming from far away. My scholarship is conditional on maintaining a clean record. Any criminal record cancels the scholarship. My father works in a factory, my mother does cleaning, they could never find the money to send me to school. As he listened to these words, Judge Caprio's eyes began to moisten. He remembered his own family, a very hard-working but financially limited family. His father working double shifts at the factory, his mother cleaning other people's houses. How valuable that scholarship was for living their dreams. In Judge Caprio's mind, that gloomy winter day of 1984 came alive. He too was 19 years old, studying at the same university, pursuing his dreams with the same scholarship. That day too, he had been stopped by police for speeding. The reason was the same. He was trying to get to his mother's doctor's appointment. Why were you speeding? He asked, as if he already knew the answer to the question coming from his own past. Michael's eyes filled with tears. My mother, ... My mother had a heart attack. At the hospital, the doctor called us. Her condition was critical. I was trying to get to the hospital, I explained to the police officer, but he just said no excuses. Judge Caprio's gavel trembled in his hand. This was no longer just similarity. This was a message traveling through time. His own mother had experienced the same situation 40 years ago. He too had rushed to the hospital. He too had been caught. He too had experienced the same fear. He remembered that day waiting beside his mother in the hospital, continuously crumpling the court summons paper in his pocket with his hands. Before his eyes, his mother's breathing, the doctor's worried faces, the footsteps echoing in the corridors, ... And at the same time, the thought that his future was in danger was gnawing at his mind. In Judge Caprio's mind, that cold February day of 1984 appeared with all its vividness. While waiting beside his mother in the hospital, he had continued to crumple the court summons paper in his pocket with his hands. He had a debt-dependent scholarship, and a criminal record could end his dreams. The judge at that time had made a decision he never forgot in his professional life. After listening to the story, old Judge Sullivan looked at young Frank and said, "Son, everyone makes mistakes, but everyone also deserves a second chance. I'm going to expunge this violation from your record, but you must promise me something. If you ever sit behind this bench one day, don't forget to give another young person the same chance." That promise had shaped Judge Caprio's entire career. Now, 40 years later, it was time to keep that promise. As Judge Caprio remembered that moment, he thought about Judge Sullivan's trust in him and the second chance he gave him. That decision wasn't just a court ruling. It was a manifestation of one person's faith in another, of mercy, and of the true meaning of justice. The courtroom was silent. Michael Romano stood with his hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the decision. Judge Caprio's eyes focused on the same fear in the young man's face. "Michael," said Judge Caprio, his voice now without any tremor, "I'm going to tell you a story. 40 years ago, a 19-year-old young man was in this courtroom. He too had been caught speeding like you. He too was worried about his mother's health. He too was a scholarship student and feared for his future." Michael's eyes widened. "Who was that young man, Your Honor?" "That young man was me, Michael. And that day, the judge sitting behind this bench gave me a second chance. He not only forgave the penalty, but also gave me the most valuable lesson of my life. Mercy is more powerful than justice." As Judge Caprio remembered that moment, he could hear Judge Sullivan's words to him again. Those words weren't just a court decision, they were a life philosophy, an intergenerational transmission of mercy, a discovery of the true meaning of justice. Everyone in the courtroom was experiencing the shock of this unexpected confession. In Judge Caprio's 30-year career, no one had ever seen him make such a personal sharing. "Michael Romano," said the judge, standing up, "I'm expunging this violation from the official records. I'm dropping the charges, but I ask something of you." Michael, in amazement, said, "I'll do anything, Your Honor. When you get your law degree, a day will come when you'll sit behind this bench. Then, don't forget to give another young person a second chance. The chain of mercy continues this way." Judge Caprio's words weren't just a court decision. This was the intergenerational transmission of a tradition, a value, one of humanity's most beautiful characteristics. This moment wasn't just the story of two people, but the story of how time flows in cycles, how mercy is passed down from generation to generation, and how justice is not just about punishment, but about giving chances. Tears began to flow from Michael's eyes. "Your Honor, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Judge Caprio smiled. "No, Michael, you saved my life. You reminded me who that young man was 40 years ago. You reminded me why I sit behind this bench." Everyone in the courtroom stood up. This was not just the resolution of a penalty case. This was the celebration of a human connection established beyond time. Michael Romano, at that moment, hadn't just received a court decision. He had witnessed one of humanity's most beautiful characteristics, mercy. And Judge Caprio, by facing his own past, had once again discovered the true meaning of justice. When the case was over, Michael Romano approached Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, I promise you, when I graduate, I will show mercy to others just as you did." Judge Caprio shook the young man's hand. "Michael, you're already doing that. Today, you reminded me of my humanity. Sometimes, facing our past is the best way to build our future." As Michael left, Judge Caprio looked out the window. The people walking on the streets of Providence were individuals, each with their own story. And he understood that sitting behind this bench, he was just part of these stories. What happened in the courtroom that day wasn't just a legal decision. This was the most beautiful example of how time flows in cycles, how mercy is passed down from generation to generation, and how justice is not just about punishment but about giving chances. The warm May sun illuminated the University of Rhode Island campus as hundreds of graduates gathered for commencement. Among them, Michael Romano stood with his family, his mother now fully recovered from her heart attack, beaming with pride. His father, still wearing his factory uniform beneath his best suit jacket, wiped tears from his eyes as he watched his son prepare to receive his law degree. In the audience, Judge Frank Caprio sat quietly, observing the young man he had helped save 3 years earlier. The judge had received a special invitation from Michael's hand, written on simple paper, "Your Honor, you gave me a second chance. Please come witness what that chance has become." As Michael's name was called, he walked across the stage with the same determined stride Judge Caprio remembered from that courtroom day. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, his face radiated confidence and purpose. When he received his diploma, Michael looked directly at Judge Caprio and nodded a silent acknowledgement that transcended words. During the graduation speech, Michael stepped to the podium with trembling hands, just as he had in the courtroom years before. But this time, the trembling was from excitement, not fear. Fellow graduates, family, and friends. He began, his voice strong and clear. This diploma represents more than individual achievement. It represents the power of second chances, the strength of mercy, and the beautiful cycle of human compassion. He paused, looking directly at Judge Caprio. 3 years ago, I stood before a judge, terrified that my future was over. I had made a mistake speeding to reach my mother in the hospital. That judge could have followed the letter of the law, but instead, he chose to follow the spirit of justice. The audience was captivated as Michael continued, but here's what makes this story truly remarkable. That judge told me that 40 years earlier, when he was exactly my age, in exactly my situation, another judge had shown him the same mercy. This diploma is not just my success, this is the work of a judge who gave me a second chance, another judge who gave him a second chance 40 years ago, and the chain of mercy, which is humanity's most beautiful trait. Judge Caprio, meanwhile, found himself approaching each case with fresh perspective. The encounter with Michael had reminded him why he had chosen law in the first place, not to punish, but to heal and guide. He began implementing new programs in his court, offering community service alternatives for first-time offenders and creating mentorship opportunities for young people in trouble. In the months following that courtroom encounter, both Michael and Judge Caprio had experienced profound changes. Michael threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor, maintaining a perfect GPA while working part-time to help support his family. He volunteered at legal aid clinics, helping other young people navigate the justice system. Judge Caprio felt tears streaming down his face as Michael concluded, "Today, I promise to continue this chain. When I sit behind a judge's bench someday, I will remember that justice without mercy is merely punishment, but justice with mercy is transformation." The story of Michael and Judge Caprio had quietly spread throughout the Providence legal community. Other judges began adopting similar approaches, and slowly, the courthouse culture began to shift from purely punitive to more rehabilitative. After the graduation ceremony, Judge Caprio sat in his car for a long time, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about Judge Sullivan, who had passed away 5 years earlier, and how proud he would have been to see the continuation of his legacy. Judge Frank Caprio understood how the experience he had in the courtroom that day had changed his life. His faith in justice was renewed, the power of his mercy increased, and most importantly, he felt at peace with his past. The scared 19-year-old boy who had once stood before Judge Sullivan was now a man who could pass on the same gift he had received. He remembered the letter Michael had sent him after his first year of law school. "Your Honor, every day I study the law, I remember that laws are just words on paper until human compassion breathes life into them. Thank you for teaching me that justice is not about being right, but about doing right." This story was not just the story of two people. This was the story of how time flows in cycles, how mercy is passed down through generations, and how justice is not just about punishment but about giving chances. Word of Judge Caprio's decision had spread beyond Providence, inspiring other judges across the country to consider mercy alongside justice. A documentary crew had approached Judge Caprio about filming his court sessions, leading to the creation of Caught in Providence, a show that would touch millions of hearts worldwide. Each episode became a testament to the power of human compassion in the justice system. Michael's story became a case study in law schools, demonstrating how one moment of mercy can change the trajectory of a life. Professor Sarah Martinez at Yale Law School would often tell her students, "The law is not just about precedent and procedure, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person who stands before you." 15 years after that transformative day in Providence Municipal Court, Michael Romano was sworn in as a district judge in Rhode Island. Judge Caprio, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, administered the oath of office. As their hands touched during the ceremony, both men felt the weight of history and the promise of the future. On his first day, Judge Romano arrived at the courthouse early, just as Judge Caprio had done for decades. He arranged his chamber carefully, placing law books on shelves and family photos on his desk. Then, he unwrapped a small package he had been saving for this moment. Inside was a simple wooden frame, handcrafted by a local artisan. He placed it prominently on his desk, where every person who entered his chamber would see it. Inside were these words, written in elegant script: "Mercy is more powerful than justice, Judge F. Caprio." As Judge Romano sat behind his bench for the first time, he felt the presence of all those who had come before him: Judge Sullivan, Judge Caprio, and countless others who had chosen compassion over convenience. He thought about the young man he had once been, terrified and desperate, and how different his life might have been without that moment of mercy. His first case that morning was a familiar one: a young woman, 20 years old, caught speeding while rushing to the hospital to see her grandfather. She stood before him with the same trembling hands, the same fearful eyes, the same desperate hope that Michael had once carried. Judge Romano looked at her file, then at her face, and smiled gently. "Tell me about your grandfather," he said, his voice warm and understanding. As she began to speak, tears flowing, Judge Romano saw himself in her story. He saw Judge Caprio in his own position. He saw the beautiful, eternal cycle of mercy that connects all humanity across time and circumstance. And thus, that beautiful cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. Each act of mercy creating ripples that would touch lives for generations to come. In that small courtroom of Providence Municipal Court, true justice had been served that day years ago. Not the power of laws, but the power of humanity had prevailed. And Judge Frank Caprio knew he had made the most meaningful decision of his career. A decision that would continue to make a difference long after he had left the bench. The story of mercy, like time itself, flows in an endless circle, each generation receiving the gift and passing it on, creating a chain of compassion that binds us all together in our shared humanity.